Ebony Carter is a woman who commands respect in every room she enters. Born into humble beginnings, she worked tirelessly to build her empire. Today, Ebony is the proud owner of a successful real estate development company, a multimillion-dollar venture that has earned her recognition in both business and social circles. But her influence doesn't stop there. Ebony is also a major shareholder and longtime client of the prestigious Carter Bank, a prominent financial institution that caters to the elite of the city. The Carter Bank stands as a symbol of stability and luxury, nestled in the heart of downtown, with its grand marble columns, ornate chandeliers, and polished floors. The bank has built a reputation for offering top-tier services to its wealthiest clients. Inside, the staff is always immaculate, and the transactions are often handled with an air of quiet discretion. Ebony has long trusted this institution with her business dealings, knowing that her wealth and interests are safeguarded within its walls. But as powerful as she is, Ebony is not immune to the occasional injustice. Today, as she walks through the familiar glass doors of Carter Bank, she is unaware that something is about to change. A simple visit to settle some accounts will soon take an unexpected turn, one that will force Ebony to confront not only her own expectations, but also the very institution she has trusted for years. As Ebony approached the towering entrance of Carter Bank, the sun filtered through the sleek glass facade, casting a warm, golden glow on the polished marble floors inside. Her heels clicked with measured precision as she stepped into the lobby, immediately drawing the attention of the well-dressed staff who stood ready to assist their high-profile clientele. Ebony had walked these halls countless times before, each visit a routine errand in the life of someone who had come to expect only the best. Today, however, something felt different. The usual serenity of the bank seemed laced with an undercurrent of tension, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. As she passed the grand chandelier and made her way toward the elevator, Ebony's gaze was drawn to the receptionist's desk, where a young assistant stood nervously. Ebony's sharp eyes noticed the subtle exchange of glances between the assistant and a tall figure standing beside the desk, none other than Adrian Collins, the bank manager. Adrian was a striking figure, known throughout the city not just for his position at the helm of Carter Bank, but for his sharp business acumen and equally sharp features. Tall, with perfectly combed dark hair and a tailored suit that looked as though it had been stitched specifically for his frame. He was the epitome of the kind of professionalism Ebony both admired and kept her distance from. Their eyes met as Ebony approached, and Adrian, always the picture of composed professionalism, flashed a quick but courteous smile. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice smooth and confident as always. "It's good to see you. I trust you're well?" Ebony offered a tight-lipped smile, offering him a brief nod of acknowledgement. "I'm well, Adrian. I was hoping to speak with you about a few matters regarding my account." "Of course," Adrian replied, his smile never faltering. "Shall we step into my office?" With a swift movement, he gestured toward the sleek, glass-walled office behind him. Ebony followed him without hesitation, sensing the faintest of hesitations in his demeanor that she couldn't immediately place. The heavy mahogany door closed behind them with a soft click, and as she settled into the leather chair across from his desk, Ebony glanced at the perfectly arranged papers, a stack of neatly filed reports, and the polished pen resting beside his laptop. Adrian took his seat, folding his hands in front of him. His expression was one of perfect calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something Ebony didn't recognize. Concern? Unease? "So, what brings you in today, Ms. Carter?" Adrian asked, his tone businesslike, but with an undercurrent of curiosity. Ebony leaned forward slightly, her voice steady but carrying a hint of authority that made it clear this was no ordinary visit. "There are some discrepancies in my account that I need to address. I also want to discuss some future investments I'm planning. But before we dive into that, there's a pressing issue that needs to be resolved." Adrian's eyebrows raised, the calm veneer of his professional mask barely cracking. "Discrepancies? May I ask what kind of discrepancies you're referring to?" Ebony's lips tightened as she took a deep breath, the weight of her words momentarily pausing the conversation. "I've noticed some unexplained deductions and charges over the past few months. At first, I thought it might have been a mistake, but it seems too consistent to be an error. Adrian's face remained calm, but the glint in his eyes shifted, a subtle sign of concern. I see, he said, his fingers lightly tapping on the desk. I'll look into it immediately. Of course, we pride ourselves on transparency and accountability here at Carter Bank. You can be sure that this will be addressed with the utmost priority. Ebony narrowed her eyes slightly, studying him carefully. She had known Adrian for years, and while they had always maintained a professional relationship, she was no stranger to his ability to maneuver around delicate issues. His reputation for keeping things running smoothly, sometimes at the expense of honesty, was no secret. I trust you'll be thorough, Adrian. But there's more than just the financial discrepancies that need to be addressed. I need to know exactly what's going on here. I didn't expect this level of confusion from Carter Bank, especially after all these years. For a moment, there was silence, as Adrian appeared to weigh his next words carefully. Miss Carter, he began, his voice softer now, tinged with an almost apologetic note. I want to assure you that everything is in order. However, if you feel there's something more beneath the surface, I'll personally make sure to investigate it fully. Ebony studied him for a moment, the years of experience in business allowing her to discern the faintest shifts in Adrian's demeanor. It was clear he was trying to smooth things over, but something about his posture, tense, almost guarded, spoke volumes. She had been in the business world long enough to know when she was being placated, and she wasn't about to let that happen. Ebony leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with the quiet confidence of someone who would not be so easily dismissed. Adrian, I've given this bank my trust for far too long to let it be undermined now. I expect answers, and I expect them soon. I don't have time for games. The room grew tense, the air thick with an unspoken challenge. Adrian sat across from Ebony, his hands still resting on the desk, though his fingers were now slightly twitching as though he were grasping for control of the situation. His earlier composure had begun to crack, replaced by the faintest hint of uncertainty. Ebony's gaze was steady, unyielding. Her posture straightened as she leaned slightly forward, her voice a sharp contrast to the calm atmosphere she had entered with. Adrian, she began, her voice low but clear, cutting through the room's charged silence. I think there's something you should know, something important about my relationship with this bank. He blinked, clearly caught off guard by the change in her tone. For a moment, he opened his mouth to speak, but the words faltered before they left his lips. Instead, he simply watched her with furrowed brows, his interest piqued by the sudden shift in the conversation. Ebony allowed the silence to hang between them, letting the weight of her next words build. She had always been strategic in her dealings, never rushing to make her cards known too soon. But now, in this moment, there was no turning back. I am the majority shareholder of Carter Bank, she continued, her eyes never leaving his. In fact, I own more than half of this institution. Every decision that's made here, every direction the bank moves in, is something I have a say in. And this situation with my account, it's not just some small oversight you can brush off. It's a direct reflection of how this bank operates. Adrian's expression shifted rapidly from confusion to disbelief, his face paling slightly as he tried to process what she had just revealed. He leaned back in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the desk with an almost desperate tension. For the first time in the conversation, the confident, practiced persona he had always worn faltered. You own the bank, he stammered, unable to hide the shock in his voice. But that's impossible. I would have known about this. We would have. You would have known? Ebony interrupted, her voice rising just enough to assert control over the conversation. You would have known, but you didn't because you weren't looking close enough. You were too busy playing your little games, running the bank as though it were just another one of your personal investments, like any other corporate venture. You thought you could keep things hidden from me, didn't you? Adrian's eyes darted to the side, as though searching for something, anything, that could explain the words he was hearing. He seemed to shrink under her gaze, the weight of her revelation bearing down on him like an overwhelming tide. His earlier composure had completely unraveled. I've watched from the sidelines, Ebony continued, her tone no longer one of accusation, but of quiet authority. I've allowed you to handle things the way you've wanted. But this is too far. Adrian cleared his throat, attempting to regain some semblance of control. His hands gripped the edge of the desk so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Miss Carter, I had no idea. If I had known. Stop, Ebony said, her voice cutting through his words like a blade. You didn't know. And that's exactly the problem. You've been so focused on your position, on maintaining the illusion of power, that you forgot who's really in charge here. You forgot who made all of this possible. It's time to face the truth. Adrian, you work for me. And it's time you started remembering that. The silence that followed her words was deafening. Adrian remained frozen, his gaze fixed on Ebony, his mind racing to comprehend the gravity of the situation. It was clear now that this was no ordinary meeting, no simple business transaction. What had started as a financial inquiry had transformed into something much larger, a revelation that shook the very foundation of everything he had believed about his career and his power within the bank. Ebony's expression softened ever so slightly, though her eyes still carried the weight of someone who had carefully calculated every move they made. This isn't personal, she said, her voice quieter now, but no less firm. But I won't stand by while my trust is taken advantage of, while the bank's resources are misused. The time for playing games is over. Adrian. She paused for a moment, allowing the words to settle between them. So, I'm giving you a choice. You can continue down this path, but know that I will be watching, and the consequences won't be something you can simply brush off. Or, you can choose to make things right, to actually live up to the values this bank is supposed to represent. Adrian's mouth opened and closed in rapid succession, struggling to find a response. He had no idea how to counter her, how to fight back against the weight of her words. The truth of what she had just revealed was undeniable. Finally, he managed to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know you had such power. I'm sorry. I'll make things right. I promise. Ebony leaned back in her chair, watching him closely, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to hear his apologies. They didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what would happen next. And for the first time, Adrian seemed to understand that. The atmosphere in the boardroom was thick with tension. Ebony sat across from the array of legal and financial experts she had assembled in response to the recent string of irregularities at Carter Bank. Reports of suspicious transactions had surfaced, many of which seemed to trace back to accounts connected with the bank's top executives. While she had always been a careful observer, Ebony had been deliberately avoiding the idea that her bank, her institution, might be involved in something more sinister. But after the revelation of the vast sums flowing through certain channels, it was clear that her worst fears were becoming a reality. Miss Carter, our preliminary findings are troubling. One of the analysts, Mark, began, his voice somber as he placed a stack of papers on the table in front of her. His gaze was steady, but Ebony could see the tension in his shoulders. It seems that a number of accounts linked to prominent clients, some of whom have deep ties within the bank, are involved in what appears to be a large-scale money laundering operation. The transactions are structured in a way to conceal the true nature of the funds. Ebony's gaze sharpened as she scanned the documents in front of her. She had long known that Carter Bank wasn't without its risks, but this level of involvement was something new, something darker. How deep does it go? She asked, her voice calm yet laced with authority. Mark hesitated. It's still early, but the pattern indicates that the funds are being moved between multiple international accounts. Some of these accounts are registered in offshore locations, which is making it harder for us to trace the origins and destinations of the money. But what's more concerning is the fact that some of these accounts seem to have been set up with the assistance of senior bank officials. Ebony's jaw tightened. She had worked hard to build the bank's reputation, and this kind of scandal threatened everything she had accomplished. Senior officials? Are you suggesting that members of my leadership team are involved in this? Another member of her team, Sarah, the bank's internal auditor, spoke up. We're still reviewing the full list of accounts, but it's clear that the involvement of some high-ranking individuals isn't just coincidental. There's been an effort to manipulate the internal systems to hide these transactions. Transfers masked as legitimate loans or investment moves. We may have a mole within the bank. The word mole hung in the air like a bad omen. Ebony had always prided herself on knowing her team, but the thought that someone close to her could be involved in something this nefarious was a bitter pill to swallow. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the edge of the table. If this is as serious as it appears, we need to move quickly. I won't let my bank become complicit in a criminal scheme. Agreed, Mark responded. We've already contacted the authorities, but it's crucial that we maintain a level of discretion. Any public knowledge of an investigation could cause panic and potentially trigger a run on the bank. We need to handle this quietly, but efficiently. Ebony nodded, her mind racing through 100 possibilities. The investigation needed to be handled with utmost precision. If this operation went public, it would not only destroy the bank's reputation, but it could also lead to severe legal repercussions. And for Ebony, who had always kept a tight grip on the institution, the idea of being associated with a criminal scheme was more than just a threat to her business. It was personal. I'll handle the media response, she said, her voice firm. We'll need to keep everything under wraps for as long as possible. In the meantime, we'll focus on identifying who within the bank could be involved and how they've managed to cover their tracks. She turned her attention to Sarah. I need a list of all the accounts that are linked to these suspicious transactions. Cross-reference them with any known associates within the bank. And be thorough. If we have a mole, I need to know who they are. And we need to neutralize them before they do any more damage. Sarah nodded and immediately began making notes. Mark and the rest of the team began to sort through their findings. Each person focused on their part of the investigation. Ebony, however, sat back, lost in thought. This wasn't just about cleaning up a mess. It was about reclaiming control of the institution she had built from the ground up. As the meeting wore on, it became clear just how deep the scheme might run. It wasn't just about money laundering anymore. There were whispers of illegal investment practices, insider trading, and possibly even ties to organized crime. Ebony knew that uncovering the full scope of the operation would take time, but she was determined to get to the bottom of it. We'll need to act fast, but carefully, she said, her voice resolute. I don't care how high up this goes. If anyone in my bank is involved in criminal activity, they will be held accountable. But we have to make sure we have the evidence before we make any moves. I won't risk destroying the lives of innocent employees because of a few bad actors. The team nodded, each person now fully aware of the gravity of the situation. Ebony had always prided herself on her ability to keep control. But now, as the investigation unfolded, she realized that her role as the bank's leader was being tested in ways she had never anticipated. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed to begin their work, Ebony sat in silence for a moment, allowing the full weight of the investigation to settle on her. The scope of the scheme was still unclear. But one thing was certain, this wasn't just a financial problem. It was a personal one. The very foundation of Carter Bank was under threat, and it was up to her to protect everything she had worked so hard to build. The investigation had only just begun, but already, Ebony felt the pressure of what was at stake. Her mind raced with questions. Who could be trusted? Who was behind this operation? And most importantly, how far did the conspiracy go? The answers would not come easily, but Ebony was determined to find them, no matter what it took. The weight of the investigation bore down on Ebony with increasing intensity as the days passed. Each moment seemed to stretch longer, with the shadow of the bank's involvement in the illicit scheme looming larger over her every decision. While she was determined to shield Carter Bank from further scandal, the involvement of the authorities, specifically the police, was becoming inevitable. She had known from the beginning that her careful handling of the situation would only delay their intervention. Now, the time had come for the investigation to take on an entirely new dimension. The call had come in the early morning hours. Ebony had barely managed to fall asleep after another sleepless night of reviewing documents when her phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but its tone was urgent. "This is Detective Taylor from the Metropolitan Police," the voice said, blunt and professional. "We have reason to believe Carter Bank is involved in a series of illegal financial activities. including money laundering and possibly even more serious crimes. We need to meet immediately. Ebony's heart sank. She had hoped to avoid the police involvement for as long as possible, but it seemed like the investigation was now out of her hands. The detective's words felt like a hammer striking the glass of her carefully constructed world. In the blink of an eye, everything she had worked for could come crashing down. "I'll arrange a meeting," Ebony responded coolly, masking her rising anxiety. She was accustomed to handling high-pressure situations, but this was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Within hours, Ebony found herself sitting across from Detective Taylor in the quiet, dimly lit conference room at the bank's headquarters. The detective, a tall man with sharp features and an air of no-nonsense authority, didn't waste time with pleasantries. His presence alone filled the room with an undeniable tension. "Ms. Carter," Detective Taylor began, his voice steady but laced with suspicion. "We've been tracking a series of suspicious transactions linked to Carter Bank. These funds are being funneled through various accounts, and it's clear that they are being used to conceal illegal activities. I need to know how far this goes, and I need to know now." Ebony sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had prepared for this moment, but facing the detective's direct interrogation was still a challenge. She kept her composure, her voice calm but firm. "I assure you, Detective, Carter Bank operates within the bounds of the law," Ebony replied, her gaze unwavering. "We are currently conducting our own internal investigation into the matter, and I'm committed to working with the authorities to get to the bottom of this. But I won't have my institution unfairly implicated in crimes we did not commit." Taylor's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're telling me that you don't know about the money laundering taking place within your own bank?" Ebony's pulse quickened, but she maintained her calm. "I'm telling you that we are investigating it, and if we find anyone within our organization who is involved in illegal activities, they will be dealt with accordingly. But I won't jump to conclusions without the facts." The detective leaned forward, his voice lowering with intensity. "The facts are clear, Miss Carter. We have evidence that points directly to your bank's involvement. Our team has already identified multiple accounts linked to criminal organizations, and the transfers are being hidden under the guise of legitimate banking activity. This isn't something that can be brushed aside. You're either complicit or you're incompetent." The word struck Ebony like a slap across the face. She had known that the investigation would escalate, but hearing the police label her bank as either complicit or incompetent was a bitter pill to swallow. Her institution had always been a symbol of trust, reliability, and professionalism, and now it was being dragged through the mud by accusations of criminality. "I don't appreciate your tone, Detective," Ebony said, her voice cold. "I'm not incompetent, and neither is my team. We are doing everything in our power to uncover the truth, but I can't help you unless you give me something concrete. We need to cooperate, but I won't be bullied into making decisions based on incomplete information." Detective Taylor regarded her for a moment, his expression hard to read. Finally, he spoke, his voice slightly softer but no less forceful. "I understand your position, Miss Carter, but you need to realize that this investigation is moving quickly. The longer you withhold information, the more damage your bank will suffer. If you don't start playing ball with us, we'll have no choice but to take more drastic measures." Ebony felt a pang of frustration. She had been doing everything by the book, every step of the way. But now, with the police breathing down her neck, it felt like her every move was being scrutinized. She could already imagine the media frenzy that would follow if the police decided to make public the ongoing investigation. It could ruin everything she had worked for. "I'm not withholding information," Ebony said firmly, "but I need time to gather the necessary facts. I've already given you everything we know. If you want full cooperation, you'll have to let us continue our investigation alongside yours. I can't guarantee you anything more at this stage, Detective." The detective's expression softened ever so slightly, but his demeanor remained stern. "You're walking a fine line, Miss Carter. I'll give you some time, but don't make the mistake of thinking we're not watching you. We'll be back to check on your progress, and if we find that you're hiding anything, the consequences will be severe." Ebony's jaw clenched. "Understood." As the meeting concluded, Detective Taylor stood and walked toward the door, leaving Ebony to reflect on the gravity of the situation. The tension in the room had escalated, and now she knew that she was not only fighting to protect her bank from an internal scandal, but also from the unrelenting pressure of law enforcement. The clock was ticking, and Ebony knew that the stakes had never been higher. She stared out the window, her mind racing with thoughts of how to navigate the growing web of suspicion and deceit. The police were now fully involved, and the future of Carter Bank was hanging in the balance. Ebony had always prided herself on her ability to control the narrative, but this time, it seemed that the story was slipping from her grasp. The tension in the air was palpable as Ebony stood in the glass-paneled boardroom at Carter Bank's headquarters. The sleek, modern design of the room, the polished wood floors, the minimalist furnishings, and the panoramic view of the city below seemed almost out of place in the current atmosphere. Today, the once pristine walls of the bank were about to bear witness to a confrontation that would either clear the air or shatter Ebony's carefully constructed world. The police had given Ebony their final ultimatum: cooperate fully with their investigation, or they would take legal action that could destroy Carter Bank's reputation. Despite her determination to protect the institution she had built from the ground up, Ebony knew the time had come to face the reality of the situation. The walls were closing in, and she had no choice but to confront the truth head-on. The door to the boardroom opened with a sharp click, and Detective Taylor walked in, flanked by two uniformed officers. His expression was unreadable, but there was no mistaking the weight of the investigation on his shoulders. He had made it clear that he was prepared to take whatever steps necessary to uncover the truth, no matter who was involved or how high the stakes were. Ebony squared her shoulders as she locked eyes with him. "Detective Taylor, I assume you're here for answers," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety swirling inside her. "That's right, Ms. Carter," Taylor replied, his voice clipped and professional. "And this time, we need more than just your word. We need results. You've been stonewalling us for weeks now, and the pressure is mounting. This investigation is no longer just about money laundering. It's about criminal networks that are embedded within your bank. We know you're hiding something." Ebony's heart raced, but she refused to show weakness. "I've given you everything I have. I've been transparent in every step of this investigation. If there's something you're not seeing, that's not my fault. Don't play games with me." Taylor shot back, his voice rising. "We've seen enough to know that someone at Carter Bank is involved in these illegal transactions. We have documents, communications, and financial records that point to high-level complicity. Your silence is becoming incriminating." Ebony felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. The noose was tightening, and she had no more cards left to play. But she wasn't ready to give in just yet. "You have your evidence, detective, but I have nothing to hide. If you have proof of criminal activity, I suggest you take it to the courts. But don't accuse me or my team of wrongdoing unless you can show it." Taylor took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "We don't need to go to court yet, Ebony. We have the power to make things very difficult for you, and we will if you don't come clean. This is your last chance." The officers in the room remained silent, their presence an unspoken reminder of the force Taylor could bring down on Carter Bank if they didn't comply. Ebony's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to defuse the situation. There was too much at stake now, not just the reputation of the bank, but her own future, her career, and the future of everyone who depended on the bank's success. "I'm not backing down," Ebony said with a finality that echoed in the room. "If you want to destroy Carter Bank, then you'll have to do it over my dead body." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of her resolve. She had fought too hard, too long to see everything she had worked for crumble in the face of unfounded accusations. No matter the cost, she was willing to fight to the bitter end to protect her institution. "Very well," Detective Taylor said, his expression hardening. "You've made your choice. We'll see how far your resolve really goes." With that, the detective turned to leave, his officers following behind him. But just before the door closed, Ebony called out. "Wait," she shouted, her voice sharp. "There's something you need to know." The detective paused, glancing over his shoulder. Ebony took a deep breath, gathering the strength to say the words that would change everything. "You're right," she said quietly, her eyes locking with Taylor's. "There is something going on at Carter Bank, but I'm not the one responsible for it. You need to look deeper. There's someone else inside the bank pulling the strings. Someone with enough power to hide behind the scenes. Someone you haven't even considered." Taylor's eyes narrowed, and he motioned for the officers to stay back. He turned fully toward Ebony now. His interest piqued. "What are you saying, Ms. Carter?" Ebony took a step forward, her voice low but filled with determination. "I can't reveal everything yet, but I'll help you uncover who's behind this. You need to trust me. If you want to save this bank, we need to work together." For a moment, there was silence. Detective Taylor studied her carefully, weighing her words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "All right," he said gruffly. "We'll give you a chance. But you better not be playing us." Ebony nodded in return, her heart pounding with the realization that this was the turning point. She had made a dangerous gamble, but it was the only option left. In the next few hours, the final confrontation at Carter Bank would unfold, and Ebony was prepared to stake everything on it. As the detective and his officers left the room, Ebony's mind raced with plans and contingencies. She had made her move, and now there was no turning back. The investigation was about to reach its apex, and the truth would come to light, no matter the consequences.